Hello, and welcome to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. I'm Ryan Purvis, your host, supported by our producer Heather Bicknell. In this series, you'll hear stories and opinions from experts in the field, stories from the front lines, the problems they face and how they solved them, the areas they focused on from technology, people and processes, to the approaches they took that will help you to get to the grips with the digital workspace inner workings.
Yeah, good on you.
I'm all right, mate. I'm all right. I'm just testing. Just trying to get myself set up with a decent microphone. So bear me a second. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Oh, well, that's fine then.
Looks like you had a nice sunny day behind you there.
Yeah, nice. It's nice. Spring is springing.
Spring is springing. It's so weird because now, normally we'd be in the same boat, but now I'm going the opposite direction. We're going into August. Into autumn.
Yeah.
Although, it's cold in the mornings, but cold is like 16 degrees, 17 degrees. Yeah, but that feels cold because you're so used to 25, 30 degrees.
Yeah. I was on a call with one of our colleagues in Singapore, and he said, we temperatures really dropped here. It's gone from 32 to 31 today. I was like, do me a favour.
Yeah, it never changes much there. I don't know if you've ever been out to LA. They get five days of bad weather a year.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the rest of the time it's just perfect. Now you can understand why everyone there is so healthy and well built and all that stuff.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, you get to go outside, don't you? Yeah, it makes a big difference.
It is a huge difference. Right. Do you want to give yourself a bit of an intro, and then we can kick on?
So I'm Stephen Russell. I kind of probably lead a little bit of a double life. I'm founder of Shumi Technologies, and what we do there is we try to connect the performance of the workforce to customer success. Talk a little bit about that. But I also work with businesses in a capacity as a consultant from a product management perspective. So currently working with a great company, Singular Decisions, on their subscriber intelligence. So looking at how subscription businesses, particularly in the paid TV space, can understand the relationship they have with their customers. So
we talk about workforce productivity. What does that actually entail, especially nowadays with people working from home, and how's that changed, if it has changed?
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting question, and I think there's kind of two perspectives. One of which is really easy to get your head around, and the one that people default to, and the other one is a bit harder, and sometimes you can get a bit philosophical about it. So the two ways I would think about it is how much work people are doing and completing, how many tasks they're getting through in a day, or you can connect it to kind of customer value and how much customer value is being generated. And then they're not the same thing. And there's a lot of busy people doing busy work and not necessarily generating value. So, that's how we think about it. We try to understand, for the time that people are putting in, because at the end of the day, that is the limited resource, the one that nobody has any control over. For the time that people are putting in, how much value is being created, and what are the things that are blocking them from creating more value with the time that they can spend.
Yeah, it's interesting you make the comment about busy work versus customer value work. We were talking about meetings the other day, and how those have increased, however many fold, and trying to get that back to a unit. Did you ever work out a formula for that?
We're still working through it. So we've got a couple of projects that we're doing validation on at the moment, and one of them is meeting analytics. So the others, they tie in with some of the others. So as I've mentioned already, connecting people performance with customer success, and then the third one, and probably done those in the wrong order, but is personalities and understanding personality dynamics, which I think now is probably more than ever. Personality is such a big driver of individual performance, and in terms of people's ability to create customer value. And I think that's one of the areas that, it really interests us. It's always interested in us, but I think even more so now, it's probably the thing that people aren't really talking about. But personality dynamics and things have been around for ages. Some people love them, some people roll their eyes. The reality is that people are different, and those differences are both valuable and destructive in different ways and in different settings. And I think when it comes to meetings in particular, so the work that we talked about, where we're trying to understand who are you spending time in your meetings with, who are you with when you have successful meetings, who are you with when meetings maybe go off the rails or are less valuable. What we're looking to try and validate is, or understand, I guess, is the place that personality plays in that, and really coming at it from the perspective of, as a manager, what can you do to ensure that you understand the personalities you have in your team, and you're taking steps to address the gaps or give people the opportunities that they would need to perform and to contribute in the best possible way. Because people won't do it for themselves because it's their own personality.
But now, are you deriving the personality from analytics as opposed to doing like a Myers-Briggs or an Enneagram or any of those sorts of tests beforehand?
Yeah, so the latter. Now, deriving it from behaviours and from analytics is something that we are interested in and have looked at. The reality is that obviously we're a very small we're in startup mode. We're doing obviously a lot of validation. And so for us, it's about making sure we put our innovation and our time and attention into things that we think are new and are different and are going to make a material difference to the way people work. There's so many psychometrics out there that we haven't at this point needed to do any of that kind of inference from data. I should probably take a step back and say, at the heart of everything that we do is this philosophy that there is a connection between fundamental factors that influence performance. And we're trying to understand that graph of performance factors in detail. So we can take signals from certain data sets and sort of try and interpret those. But sometimes it's just easier to ask the question directly, get an answer. So,
sure.
Sort of, I guess, a long-winded way of saying, yes, we use personality questionnaires to understand personality at this point, but then understanding that in the context of the performance graph and the factors that influence performance, that's the bit that we think we're doing that is new and maybe helpful.
Two questions. I mean, those fundamentals you mentioned, what would be examples of those fundamental behaviors?
So there's hundreds of them, and it's kind of hierarchical. Essentially, somebody described it as kind of a pixelation of performance, which I quite like that description of it. But really, there's sort of 5 areas that we really focus on. So process, and within the context of process, you'd have things like a process is defined, are they understood, are they efficient, and are they applied, right? So, it's all very well having a process, but if people ignore it. So we've got kind of, what's the procedures that are required to execute the work that needs to be done? And then you've got expertise, right? And that's obviously the ordinary stuff you'd expect, like learning and development and certification. But it's also situational awareness, right? Situational experience. I've actually done this before. It's game time, right? So training's one thing, game time's another. How much game time have I actually got? So that's the expertise angle. We then look at things like agility. So to what extent can this work be done in isolation of anything else, or is it dependent on other work? And to what extent can people make their own decisions? Do they have the data that they need to make those decisions? So that would be the agility angle. The alignment one is obviously the kind of classic stuff around, do you understand the vision, what the goals are, what the end game is, why we're doing it, that kind of the meta stuff that keeps everybody moving in the same direction. And then energy, to what extent are people applying themselves? Do they feel motivated to do that work? Is it the sort of thing where they want to go the extra mile, or is it something that is actually a bit of a ball ache and don't really want to? And are people feeling fit and well and healthy, and or are they feeling under pressure, stressed? Have they got the right level of stress? So underneath those five kind of what we would say characteristics of the work. So if you think you've got the personality of the worker, this is the personality of the work, and the personality dynamics of the work would be process, agility, expertise, alignment, and energy. Those are like our big 5, if you like, in the way that you'd have extroversion, openness, agreeableness, that type of stuff.
Yeah, this Ocean was the acronym for that, hey?
That's right. Yeah. And all those methodologies are built around the big five, and there's IPIP, which I forget exactly what IPIP stands for, but it's essentially an index of personality statements which you can use, and they're positively or negatively keyed to certain personality factors. So that's essentially how we map the two.
So then the second question I had around that was, are you trying to answer questions like, if I need to brainstorm an idea, these are the people I should have in the room. If I need to do something operational to solve a problem, these are the people I should have in the room. And if I need to do something creative or whatever, problem solving, I have these people in the room. And you might have overlaps, and you know, obviously diversity is important. But is that what the software is trying to help the decision maker with their decision to make? That's terrible language, but you know what I mean, I think.
So I think I think I understand where you're coming from. I'd say no, that's not what we're trying to do at the moment. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not something that we wouldn't kind of go in that direction. I think what we're trying to do is start at the beginning, so make people aware of what's actually going on. So we talk about hidden risks, and we talk about sort of the unspoken truths of the work that's being done. So highlighting to management in particular, but then also other people in your circle who you might need to collaborate with, where you feel that some of those factors might be a challenge or a gap. Making sure that other people are aware that you feel like that, or making other people aware that those things are true, means that that's where the attention goes. So we're not necessarily getting as far as saying, you've got this type of challenge or this type of problem, or this is the agenda of your meeting. These are the people you need to bring. But from the agenda of the meeting, or understanding the work topic, the work item that meeting is about, understanding the characteristics of that work can mean that people's attention go on the right things, and that you don't get caught up on stuff just because it's the loudest voice in the room. But also, when people come together for those meetings, do they all feel the same way, or is there a subject matter expert who people should just sit back and defer to in that particular case? So, does that make sense?
It does, which leads me to another question. Have you ever come across OKRs?
Yeah, we use OKRs. I've used OKRs in pretty much every role for the last 10 years or so.
I needed a consultant. I should have got you to come in.
Probably not, because I'd have told you not to use OKRs, but that's a different story.
Oh no! I'd love to unpack that, but that what I was trying to get. Why I brought that up, because we're about to do this now, and one of the reasons why we're trying to do this is, we have a technology team, we have a risk team, we have a Mariner expert team, and we have a couple other teams, and we're trying to get everyone to work together a little bit more. The usual words, efficiency, effectively, etc. And we're thinking that, we have a quarterly plan, which, someone has to maintain and manage. But what we're really trying to say is we have these objectives and we need to meet those objectives in the quarter. And we need everyone to be aware that when you agree to these objectives, those are the priorities. That's what you should be working on, and not get caught by the sort of magpie effect of something else shiny that shoots past, and or the squirrel, takes the thing away. So that's why we're going down the route of OKRs. Now, would you, with what you're doing with Shumi, help in alignment like that? Because you mentioned hidden truths or hidden work. That's the thing that hurts you the most, is the work you're doing that's not a priority, or not aligned to the priorities, but is it also a priority, if that makes any sense? Because as you said, it shouts the loudest at the time.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's a lot to unpack in what you've just asked. So I'll try and give a coherent answer. So I guess, start with why. Why are we doing OKRs? And I think from what you've just said, that it's about not getting distracted, and it's about making sure that people are working on the things that are going to contribute most to the organization's success. Right? Fairly straightforward. That's why people go to OKRs. But I think it's very easy to get caught up in the procedure of OKRs, and you got to ask yourself really what's important. So firstly, why are people getting distracted? because I tend to start from a position that people are generally good. They generally want to do a good job. Not everybody wants to go, above and beyond, and not everybody is interested in. Not everybody's massively aspirational or what's the word? Ambitious. But equally, people don't tend to turn up to work and think, I'm just going to go and do something unhelpful today, or I'm going to go off on a tangent. So generally, those people are doing those things because they believe they are valuable, right? So that's my starting point. So then the question is, well, is that a problem because it's taking resource away from the other things that the business feels are more important for too long, right? So time is the resource that none of us can control. It's the limited resource that none of us control. So where people get frustrated with that type of stuff is when a job hasn't been done, and the thing that the magpie distraction has eaten up the time that should have been spent on it, right? So nobody cares about the distraction if the thing that they care about got done as well. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is understanding what people are spending their time on and where they're successful, and understanding why they're not successful in certain places. You don't need OKRs for that. And actually OKRs can help you feel like you're making progress in terms of alignment when actually you're not getting that much further. So I've seen organizations go through OKRs processes, and at the end of it, what they have that they didn't have at the beginning was a conversation and a spreadsheet. So the conversation is the important piece. Do I understand what it is that I need to be doing and why it's valuable to the organization? And then the second piece is, well, if I discover something else that I also believe is valuable that wasn't part of that original conversation, to what extent am I allowed to go and work on that and try and create that value? And people should have the freedom and the autonomy to take those opportunities when they come up. But equally, the company and the organization needs governance to say, well, okay, you're now spending too much time on it, or that is now taking resource away from something that we deem to be more valuable. So OKRs is helpful in a way. I tend to feel like they're more for much, much bigger organizations than the ones I've worked in. I think when I see small organizations doing OKRs, they tend to be a side project, and they tend to be something that HR care about a lot more than people at the front line. Which sounds horrible, I know, but and there'll be HR friends of mine who'll be telling me off for saying something like that. But that's just my experience of it.
Yeah, so I mean, ours is driven from the CEO, which and look, we haven't gone through the exercise, so it's one of those things. Let's see what happens in 3-6 months. I mean, our challenge is that you got these different pockets doing the things that they are priorities for each team, but they don't always link up with the general, organizational priorities. I mean, stuff's getting done, obviously. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But it's trying to find that even more seamless environment, I guess. Yeah. So what would you use if you didn't use it?
So let me backtrack slightly and say it's not. I don't necessarily advocate for not using it at all, but just I think it's often seen as a panacea, right? So let's say the organization successfully implements OKRs, and everybody knows what they should be doing and understands what success looks like. Okay, of the 5 things that we believe influence performance, you've really only touched on one of them, maybe 2 of them, right? So you're now very well aligned. Everybody's moving in the right direction, and everybody's work is contributing towards a common goal. That's brilliant, and that's a really important thing. But the actual work that is then being done, the work that produces those key results, OKRs isn't going to help you with defining good procedures for that or making sure that they're implemented. OKRs isn't going to make sure that you've got the right people resourced to the right tasks and that they've got the right situational experience. It's not going to help you motivate people, and it's not going to help you kind of manage pressure. You could make a case for the fact that it would, but you'd be retrofitting. And it touches on agility. It touches on people's ability to make their own decisions. Like if you've given them that alignment, you've given them that clarity of the end goal, then yes, people will be in a better place to make choices for themselves. But you've not necessarily given them the data they need to make those choices. You've given them the confidence. So, OKRs are great. They're a powerful tool for alignment, but that's like saying you're only going to deal with introversion, extroversion on a personality dynamic, and you're not going to worry about agreeableness or openness or any of the other things that make up the person's personality and contribute to who they are at work. So, when you're thinking about the character of the work, OKRs are helpful for making sure that alignment pillar is nailed on, but that's only one of the 5.
No, I can see your point. I mean, I think we're only looking for alignment out of it. All the other things you mentioned, I mean, that's where you rely on. Maybe we go into product management now, where the technology focus would be based on building things that will have high value to the customer, based on a prioritization agreement, framework of some sort. And that handles the processes of what am I building this sprint, and what am I building next sprint, and what's the vision for the next quarter or whatever it is for the product, and that should marry up with the objectives that are now part of the OKR exercise. But all the things that go with building the product are other tried and tested processes and procedures, and the sort of agile methodologies using Scrum. There's things you would do that their own processes and own procedures. DevOps is another one where you'd have a whole bunch of agreed, I don't want to say rules, maybe principles, on releasing often and small pieces of work that's being tested and not big bang. Those sorts of things. Is that sort of where you're going, or?
Yeah, it is. I think that's the point I was probably trying to make, and maybe overstated it. Is you do need alignment. You don't need OKRs to achieve alignment. But you definitely need alignment, and there are different levels of work, right? So there is the frontline work, people doing the work, and then there is governance and management of that, and so you do need to be able to express it in different ways for different people in different settings. So I think that's where I was going with the comment about agility. When you're prioritizing a backlog, you're prioritizing the work that is going to be done, and you're putting that in an order. Those choices have to be driven by higher is probably the wrong word, but the organizational objectives. What are we trying to achieve for the long term? But equally, those objectives, and again, it depends on the size of the organization. If those objectives don't change very much, then maybe OKRs work a lot better. I've worked more in businesses that are small, rapidly growing, and often require a lot more agility. So understanding those objectives requires strong conversations and upfront discussions about the business value that we're trying to generate and the customer value that we're trying to generate, and not just, whether one work item is more valuable than another in isolation. Probably a slightly incoherent answer to your question, that I'm afraid. Sorry.
I think that's you go down to the point that I know I struggle with this. So when and specifically with working with guys trying to build a product, what is value? Value is such a vague, and maybe it's because it's a V, a vague term. How do you decide what is valuable? Because if I look at high-low, for example, there's the key thing there is we rely on data from our customers in order to provide a risk output that tells them where to focus on to avoid people dying. Yep. So the value there is pretty clear. How do we make that happen in the quickest possible way so that they know where they need to spend their money to save lives? But then you break it down into the next level down. So we now have stuff we have to do for our internal people to make their jobs easier to get through the data processing, the report writing, all the things they have to do, versus what the customer has to do in giving us their data. And you see this constant back and forward thing where we're trying to take the manual effort off the customer, but in order to do that, we have to bring it internally into the business first, and then we can look at systematizing it. And then it's a case of, okay, well, now we've done. So I'll give you sort of background to this. When I joined Hilo 2.5 years ago, we were using a very complicated Excel spreadsheet full of macros that every customer would go and copy their data into, and then it would process the data in the Excel spreadsheet. That would then get emailed into a central team who then manually would move it out of that Excel spreadsheet into another spreadsheet and do the risk calculation. Okay. Yes. So you can imagine how difficult that was to do for 10 customers. When I joined, we had 19 customers. We now, I don't know how many we've got now, but it's a lot more than that. And the only way to scale that is to take away the load from the end user. And there were other problems which I'll talk about now, and bring that inside. So other problems we had was they weren't sending us all the data, for example. Now they send us everything, because there was a level of, well, this is too much work for me to do, so I'll just send you 2 or 3 records versus the 300 that I've got, because it's quicker for me just to do 3 and shift it on. Now they send us everything, so we don't have that problem anymore. But now we've got this data processing problem. Now the value, so the reason why I was bringing up value is, how do you judge, or how do you balance the value to the end user customer, the one who's paying the bills, versus the person who has to do the processing work or the internal work? Because both of them need to be in harmony or balanced. Even though one pays, the one, there's a measure, easy measure to say this is money versus the resource. But if we overload it too much to the end user, to the end customer, then you never solve the internal problems, which makes it more expensive to run the business. So you've still got a cost benefit balancing act. And that's, I guess in a way, my very long-winded example is, or question is, how do you decide what value is, and who gets the response to the value?
There's a couple of parts to that. That's how I would answer that, and I think I would answer it. We've talked before about a book of mine, which is one of my favourite books. Was introduced to by a data engineer I work with, and is still a very good friend of mine. And it's called The Goal. And a lot of people have heard of the Phoenix Project, or at least a lot of people in IT have heard of the Phoenix Project, but fewer people have read The Goal, which actually the Phoenix Project is based on. And the reason why I bring that book up is because what you're describing to me as I'm listening to you, the thing I took from that book is an understanding of the importance of systems thinking, and that took me down the sort of the path that led to Shumi as a kind of an idea, a philosophy, and then a product and a company, and there's a message within The Goal that sometimes gets lost, and certainly got lost with the Phoenix Project translation. Now, the book's called The Goal for a reason, right? So the goal is the goal of the company. What is the goal of the company? And it ultimately comes down to 3 things, right? So make sales, get customers to give you money for whatever it is you're making. The second thing is to make it and deliver it to the customer. And the third thing is to do that second one fast enough that you don't run out of money before they give you the money, right? So it's really simple sales, building products, but doing it fast enough that you don't run out of money in the meantime. And that's the function of any business. Okay, so then if you think about your example, you're describing a system within a system. So when you get to system, when you think about systems thinking, one of the most important things to start with that people don't necessarily analyze is what's the purpose of the system. So the purpose of Hilo, and we can get philosophical about this, right? But it stops existing if it doesn't make sales and doesn't make a product that people want to buy, and doesn't do that quickly enough that it doesn't run out of money, right? So that's just the brutal, harsh reality of a capitalist world, right? So we'll avoid the discussion about that probably for today. But the point is, if that's the purpose of that system, then the system that you're talking about, where you're trying to understand the workflow and look at that, that lives within that bigger system, so it has to exist in that bigger system, right? And so if the purpose of that work isn't aligned to the higher objective of Hilo as an organization, then you end up in conflict, you end up with a dysfunctional system. So that's the first thing. So the people who are making that decision, I think your question was, who gets to decide what value is? You get to decide what value is within your system, the bit that you have control over, but you can't be in conflict with the systems that the bigger systems that you're part of. So that's where OKRs can be helpful. This is a long-winded answer, but I am going somewhere with this. So then the question is, well, okay, in this context, at the coal face, where we're trying to improve this process for ourselves and for our customers, what is it that we're trying to improve? Are we trying to improve our ability to sell to them? So are we trying to increase the number of sales that we can do and the capacity for bringing in revenue? Are we looking to improve the speed at which we can build the product, or the quality of the product that we build? And then, are we looking to be as efficient as possible so we don't run out of money in the meantime? So yep. That's the decision. That's the first decision that whoever's deciding that value on the ground needs to be thinking about. And that's the joy of OKRs, is if you use something like OKRs, then you can join those two things together, because ultimately the CEO, you can dress it up in lots of different ways, and you can write very clever objective statements, and this is what we're trying to do this year. But everybody in the organization exists under the context of three objectives: make sales, build a product people want, and do it fast enough that we don't run out of money in the meantime. Right? So there's always that high level purpose that should come down into any of those objectives. So that's my first part of the answer. And then the second part kind of comes back to kind of the character of the work, because first of all, there's an urgency profile, right? So if you've got if you've got those three objectives to begin with, and one of them is don't run out of money in the meantime, then there is an urgency profile to all of the different work items that you could choose from. There's an urgency profile to them. Some things will be valuable, but incrementally. Some things will be valuable, but only up until a certain day, after which they're no longer helpful, or we've missed the boat. So there's different profiles to the urgency of work, and I like to use CD3. Cost of delay divided by duration. Sorry, my mind went blank there for a moment.
Where is that from?
So cost of delay divided by duration is actually from a similar world as things like the goal.
It sounds Six Sigma.
It is. I think it's all baked into that type of stuff as well. So it's very much about, this work item has a particular value, and its value has an urgency profile, i.e. it will be more valuable at certain points, less valuable if it's not delivered on time. Then so it's got a value, but then also that it will take a certain amount of time to do. And so if your objective is to try and deliver as much value as possible, in kind of a flow state, have as much value coming off the production line, as it were, as possible, knowing that the world is uncertain and knowing that it changes and it's volatile and things can be unclear and complex, then that's how you make those choices. Because I think the other thing to the second part of the answer would be, whoever makes those choices is probably going to be wrong more often than they're right, unless you operate in a very stable environment. And so it has to be the people who are at the front line who know about the changes first. They have to be allowed to make those choices, and they have to be empowered to make those choices. Now, the anxiety then that managers will get is, well, do we have a right process to go? Do we have the governance around those choices? Do we have the right expertise in place for people to be making those choices? Can I trust them to be making those choices for the right reasons and for the right motivations? And that really then becomes the job of management, is to make sure that people are in a position and have situational experience and the right procedures to make those choices when change happens, but make those choices in a way that is aligned with the higher ups, as it were.
Yeah, I think, and that's how we've addressed it, is that the priorities are determined by the business, inverted commas, but these are guys that in the industry have been around, a long time, and they've all worked in the roles that we are servicing. So they can sit there as the customer and say, this report needs to have bells and whistles on it because I need the bell, I need to whistle. So I think in that sense we've got it right. I think the challenge we've always had is, and it's just an industry thing, I think the level of understanding on how to build software is just not there. And there's almost the expectation problem that, well, we talked about it today, well, why can't I have it by Friday? It's like an Excel spreadsheet, right? I can build an Excel spreadsheet in a couple of days. Why can't you build a piece of software in a couple of days? And yes, some things you can, of course. Of course you can build some stuff very quickly. But there's some stuff that, takes time, and it takes refinement sessions, and it takes workshops, and it takes backwards and forwards, and, mock-ups, and, all these new terms that well, for us is kind of commonplace, but for these guys, it's like So you're going to build a prototype. What does a prototype actually mean? I don't understand that concept. And now you show me this. Can I just tell the customer they can use it from Monday? No, this was just a prototype. This is something we're going to throw away now that we've proved that we can do it. There's those sorts of things.
Yeah. And I think it's that again is only going to get worse, and is only going to get. What's interesting? So I can freely admit, I've been guilty of being that manager who's saying, well, it sounds a lot easier to me than you're making out, or I think we should be able to do that faster. And in a way, it's driven by. One, it's driven by a need to do things quickly enough that you don't run out of money in the meantime, right? And the frustration sometimes comes that when people are detached from that reality and they're not looking at a P&L or they're not looking at a runway, you feel that they don't necessarily have the same motivations and they're not necessarily putting their energy in for the same reasons. So there's that side of it, which is making sure that people understand those three, the purpose of the business, and understand that the conversation is in the context of those three things, immediately makes that go away, right? When people feel like others are making decisions for their own interests and because of their own silo, that's where conflict comes from, right?
Yeah.
If the conversation begins with this silo exists within this bigger silo, and so we all share, we all share the objectives of generating income, creating products, and doing it fast enough that we don't run out of money in the meantime. Then that immediately resolves a lot of the conflict and a lot of the emotional stuff that goes on in those conversations. So that's the first thing. How do you deal with the kind of the emotional tension and the motivations of both parties in that discussion? And then the second thing I think is Agile probably hasn't done Agile with a big A, probably hasn't done us a huge amount of favors because it's been so poorly implemented so many times, and it's got a bad reputation by people who don't really understand it, and it's kind of clung to as the answer to everything by some people who do. And I probably sit somewhere in the middle. I think that as long as people can see and understand that customer value is being created at each of those steps, and as long as that's communicated back to the leadership in the context of making sales, products, doing it fast enough that we don't run out of money in the meantime, then actually those conversations are a lot easier and get resolved a lot more easily. What I mean by that, and where the challenge is with that, is actually, and certainly I think in the areas that I've worked in, there's been a massive wage inflation in developers. And what that's meant is that a lot of businesses have ended up trying to hire more and more junior staff. So the situational experience isn't there. The commercial awareness isn't there at the front line. And so that communication doesn't happen in the way that it needs to. And there's a role of a manager, that technology leadership role that is sort of taking out that information and turning it around and speaking to the execs in a way that says, look, we're doing this and we're taking these steps because this is ultimately how it influences those three things. Either it's going to make a product that people want to buy for a higher price, or it's going to mean we can do it faster. It's not, that translation isn't happening in a lot of cases. And if the team at the front line can communicate their choices in that context, then that's when you don't need OKRs.
Yeah, and as you're saying this, I mean, this is exactly where I'd say in a good sense, we're in that position. I think our challenge has been is the technology team has got into a good position. We got good process. We have the right involvement from the business. We do a work in progress thing, review with them every week. We release code every week that's with functionality. So one, we're giving them visibility of what's coming. Two, we're getting their feedback on anything we have released. Three, we're kind of using a ring deployment method where we can deploy to a certain amount of users can see the functionality first before it goes to the wider audience. So we get feedback from there. So I think our feedback loops are quite good. Which is one of the key things I got out of I'm reading the DevOps book, the DevOps handbook that goes with The and these things are all intuitive to an extent. I mean, and I agree with you with Agile being poorly implemented. Usually everyone just reads it as, well, you got to do a 2-week sprint, and you can change your mind every 2 weeks, which is not quite how it's supposed to work. But you do have a level of flexibility. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, it's across you. But also trust. It's this idea that if you just trust the team, they'll bring you the value back, and that's only true if the character of the work is, you've got decent processes, you've got good people with situational experience on it. You could trust me to go and build you some software, and you'd be wasting your time and money, because I'm not going to build you any decent software, because I'm not a software developer. Just because somebody has the role title software developer doesn't automatically mean that they will either. There has to be an element of situational experience, choices, alignment, energy that's going into it. So making sure that the team, the character of the work and the character of the project is understood in those terms, and that gaps are being addressed, is much more important than just saying, I trust you for 2 weeks to go away and do what I want, what I need. Because there's 100,000 reasons that they won't, that have nothing to do with people's integrity or capability, or it's and that's where it becomes a personal thing. It becomes about the people and not about the work. And I think that's the thing that people need to probably spend more time on, is describing the character of the work and not the character of the people doing it.
You've hit the nail on the head, because I was about to give an example of something I've dealt with. I've dealt with a few times, actually, let's be fair. So when I started writing code many years ago, it was always about not just writing code. It was about understanding what the problem was and trying to make it thing. Now, I was never the best developer, I'll admit that, but I always felt that I took the time to understand the problem to deliver it appropriately and properly, without needing all these extra people to help me. So what does that mean? I come across developers a lot that need a business analyst to go get the requirements for them. They need an architect to tell them how they're going to build it. They need a tester to go test for quality. They need someone to do the deployments for them, and that's almost this sort of they're not a fully diverse developer in my mind. You want someone, in my mind, a developer will look at something and go, okay, so you want this to serve you coffee every Wednesday at 9:00. Why do you want to do that? What's the reason behind it? And is this the one? But they'll start going into, they'll ask good questions, and before they've even touched a piece of code, they've gone through this exploration exercise so deeply that when it comes to actually writing the code is like 10% of the effort, and it's almost the boring part, because you've done all the hard stuff. And often what I find is the other way around. I get these developers that will take the problem. It's a one-liner. They'll go and write a whole lot of code. They'll spend days and weeks writing this thing, and they'll come back and go, "Here's what I got you." And you're like, "Yeah, but that's got nothing to do with what we do. Like, it's a complete miss." And that's the challenge that I try and solve with developers, to get them to do all the other stuff first before they even write code.
And it's a really difficult thing to get right. And I think my personal experience of that is, the people who are the best at that aren't the best at that because they were born that way. They're the best at that because they've been doing it the longest. And I know it sounds, there's not a Udemy course for that, because I think that is, and that's not something. And again, this is where people will reach for procedure, and they'll reach for the Scrum manual.
Yeah.
And they'll reach for, we need to have really highly defined acceptance criteria. I've seen acceptance criteria, done to the nth degree with the best of intentions, and the work still misses because there's still gaps in the understanding. There's things that weren't said. It's all, so I think that comes with experience, and that's why situational experience is such an important part of expertise. It's not just certifications. It's not just qualifications. It's situational experience. And I think that, because that takes time, and because that is such a valuable skill when it comes to actually creating customer value, it's expensive.
No, it is, and you're 100% right. I mean, the people, I didn't learn that stuff by magic. I just happened to work with a very good team who.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, who made sure you understood that was the way you do things. Because when I used to write stuff on my own, obviously you develop very bad habits, but you work with a team that they say, well, don't even touch the code till you've shown me your design and show me, I mean, when you go to university, they teach you things like pseudocode and state diagrams and all that stuff, which, at a university level doesn't really help you. But when you're building an application for the enterprise, you need to do some of those things, and you need to have an underlying understanding of what you're building.
John, my business partner, uses a phrase, and I'm not sure where he gets it from, but the last responsible moment. So there's a couple of different algorithms for figuring out, am I spending too much time navel gazing and doing the pontification or not? And in Lean, it's called I forget what it's called. That's annoying. But essentially, you defer the choice till as late as possible. And John describes it as the latest responsible moment, right? So understanding at which point does not having made a choice become irresponsible and start to be damaging. So knowing that there is a decision to be made, there is a decision point, that is a point in time at which somebody will make a choice. What is the latest point that can be made? And I have absolutely no idea why it is this, but there's like a theory around. So if you've got 100 days to buy a house, how long should you spend looking at houses before deciding to put an offer in? And I forget exactly which percentage it is. It's like 32 or 37%. It's like a third of the time, basically. After which you're unlikely to see any more houses that are better than the one you like the most at that point. But any less than that amount of time, and you won't have considered things that you find attractive. So it's a really interesting algorithm that I can find links to and send them to you, because I can't remember it brilliantly off the top of my head just now. But that's ultimately the same thing, right? So if you can quantify things a little bit for people, then they can understand them a little bit better. So when we're talking about designs, and we're talking about feedback loops, and we're talking about the way that product is made, understanding that at the moment we're still in the process of understanding what the choices are, and the decision point looks like this, then you can explain to people why it's important to spend that time getting to that decision point, and that from that point on, there's no point continuing to navel gaze about it. We're probably not going to get it. We're probably not going to nail it. We're probably not going to get it right. That's tech, right? But what's understanding and judging and being on the same page about what's the appropriate amount of time for us to invest in making the decision and understanding the choices. That's really important, because ultimately that feeds into then are we building something people want to buy, and are we doing it fast enough? So it's always a trade-off.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the reality. It's like a symphony. You're the conductor, and you've got to keep all the pieces moving. But in some cases, you've got to slow things up or speed things. Slow things down or speed things up. Yeah. No, I totally get where you're going.
Yeah.
So how has that worked with if you start in a new organization, you can do that stuff from the get-go. What about going into an organization that's been doing it the old way for a long time? And I say old way, waterfall approach, or no real process, just building, chasing fires down, fixing bugs and building stuff ad hocly. So
I would I'll preface my answer with there's nothing wrong with doing it waterfall, if that's the right way to do it. And the waterfall versus agile is a debate that I have little interest in, having had it many, many times and come out bruised and battered by people who are bigger and uglier than I am. Anyway, the point I think is, rather than trying to understand the change that needs to happen or where people need to get to, getting on the same page about what is happening right now. So in Lean, again, you would build a process flow map, and then you'd have your current state, and then you'd have your desired state, and you try and figure out your phases in between. Step one, whether you're agile or waterfall, it doesn't matter. is understanding that everybody has the same mental model of what the current state is. Because the conflict comes from a lack of understanding about what's actually going on when they can't see the work. And this is even worse now we're all remote, right? So you can't see people working. And so there's just this is a horrible, like, intuitive, emotional thing that goes on where people start to panic and they fear that they're spending money on workers that aren't as productive as they need to be. And it's very old-fashioned kind of ugly
factory mindset.
Factory mindset, exactly that, right? And that's definitely not what we want. So the first thing is understanding what is the current process and what actually happens, and then understanding where are the optimizations in that. But the optimizations then, as part of understanding that process, you're essentially describing the system. And coming back to my point earlier, to describe the system, you have to describe the purpose of the system. So is the purpose of the system to make it less onerous on the customer, or is the purpose of the system to shorten the time it takes for us to get from idea to sale? Now, there is a way of describing the system that you've drawn out that both the execs and the people who are doing the work agree on. And that's the first step. Doesn't matter where you want to get to. If you don't have that to begin with, you'll just go around in circles arguing. Does that answer your question? You've gone quiet.
Yeah, it does. No, it does. So, and I agree with you about the is waterfall versus agile. I don't think it matters because I think they're still the same in the end. I mean, the only difference obviously is that waterfall, you shouldn't be writing code necessarily on day one. You should be understanding the requirements and doing all the documentation you would normally do. The problem with that approach obviously is that some businesses will have moved on from their requirements by the time you start building the system, which is where I think the agile has a benefit, or the agile approach. But the converse with agile is you tend to be building things like you build a barnyard, where you add to the barnyard every so often with something new, so it doesn't look the same. It's not consistent. It's not uniform. It's it's very patchwork, which for some products is fine. I think that's totally okay to do it that way. But I think it comes down to being very clear on what you want to build from day one. As you said, what's the output or the end in mind would probably be the phrase, and you're going to zig and zag as you get there.
That's it. And it all comes back to the decision point, right? So waterfall is absolutely fine if beyond the decision point, the things that factored into the decision are unlikely to change. It's absolutely the right way to do things. Probably more helpful, in fact, for everybody involved and better coordination. But it depends on each decision gate being, not being before a whole bunch of change to the factors that went into that decision. So if the factors that went into the decision are going to change after the decision's been made, then waterfall's a terrible way to do things. And obviously that's why people get themselves into a bit of a mess. Now, on the other side, with agile, I think sometimes it's not clear what the decisions are that need to be made and who needs to make them. And I think it's what you were saying, that there are core choices. There's core architectural choices, both from a commercial business model perspective and from a technical perspective that need to marry up. And then a lot of the design decisions around that can be a bit more flexible and will impact less. So I think it's recognizing where a choice is materially going to influence those three things that the business is there to do. So is this choice going to materially impact sales? Is it going to materially impact the quality of the product? Is it going to materially impact the speed at which we can build it? Where you have those three choices, those choices need to be taken by people who have the commercial awareness and the situational experience. And it is the leadership's responsibility to make sure that they are. And it's actually, it is negligent and irresponsible to allow decisions that are that important to the existence of the organization to be taken by people who are unqualified or inexperienced or maybe even just don't have the information. We all make good choices based on the information that we have, but it's called bounded rationality in systems thinking. Bounded rationality I just don't have the information that you have, I'm not going to make the same choice, am I?
Yeah, and I think you've actually answered my question in the beginning around the framework for deciding value, which is speed, quality, or sales.
Ultimately, that's what I took from the goal. Kind of build a quality product, kind of sell it to people, and kind of do those two things quickly enough that the capital I have right now means I don't run out of money. Those are all the choices anywhere in the organization should be taken in that context. And it's amazing what happens when you have that conversation with people, because all of a sudden, they're commercial points, right? But technical people love that conversation because they want to be making choices, technical choices. And this is where it's interesting to watch technical people having conversations with commercial people where they're not talking about those things. Like the commercial person saying, I want a blue button. I just want a blue button. Why can't it be blue? And why can't it be blue on Friday? It's like, and technical people are like, well, it can be, but in the back of their mind, they're thinking, it doesn't seem like a very sensible thing for us to do as a business. But on the flip side, what technical people aren't trained to do and isn't part of software development training is actually explaining why they feel like that in those three terms, so that the commercial person on the other side of the table goes, all right, okay, yeah, Wednesday's fine. I'd rather have it on Wednesday with the things that you're thinking of that you're not expressing because we've not got the same common language. We've not got the same way of talking about these things. I'd rather wait and get the one that you're talking about. And that's what collaboration is about. You can't collaborate with people if you don't have the same language.
Yeah, I can see so many scenarios where I've tried to explain something to someone and you can just see that the minute you've started down the track that it's either too much information or in their mind it's too technical or too detailed. All they wanted to know was blue button Friday. Yes, that's all they wanted to hear.
and also the appreciation, having worked on both sides of the fence, the appreciation of the emotional reaction that person is having when you say no, right? So they understand the implications from a customer's perspective of, right, I'm going to have to go back to the customer and say it's not going to be Friday. That means they might go with our competitor, right? So that means the urgency profile of the work is, if it's not done by Friday, it might as well not be done at all, right? So there's an emotional response to that then clouds the rest of the conversation. And I think that's where, for me, I can debate anything with you if you agree with me that some empathy is always a good thing, right? So that's my kind of life philosophy. I'll debate any topic with you as long as we can agree that some empathy is always a good thing. And that's where often these conversations can be most challenging, is where that empathy is not necessarily. You can sympathise with people's frustration, but actually understanding and empathising with the position that puts them in, that's a difficult. That's where a lot of the tension in the conversation can come from.
Are you familiar with Ray Dalio?
Yeah, the principles.
Yes. Yeah. The only thing, I mean, he's got a lot of good stuff in there, but the thing that really struck me was his radical candor. And that is that. So what I'm very lucky with our current business is they're very transparent. And they'll say things like, look, this customer, this is a big one. This is an important one. Like if we have this one, it opens up all the other ones. So we need this feature, this functionality. And then that's very easy to say, okay, well, this thing moves to the top of the queue because the other stuff is important, but it's not this is customer, as you say, back to customer sales, that kind of stuff. But I have worked in organizations where, yeah, you don't know what the underlying politics are to the blue button by Friday, and no one will tell you, and it almost becomes a fairy tale. If you don't do it by Friday, the wizard's going to come in and zap you or something. I don't know, some nonsense like that. But it does make making decisions very difficult. So I'd rather have radical candor, which is product's crap. We need to fix it. It's not looking good. It needs more usability. It needs whatever it is to sort that out.
I couldn't agree more. And actually, it's not just because I'm talking to you, but I've said this to other people about when we work together. You can be very direct. You can you say it as it is, right? But we always, I value that because I always know that it's coming from a place where you're trying to care about the same things, right? So we found a happy place with that understanding of, right, okay, if we clash, then let's just go back to what are we here to achieve? What are we actually trying to achieve? Because it's not about the blue button. And I think that the radical candor thing is not just about being direct. It's also about it coming from a place where you care about the other person's success. And that's where that works. And and I think this is why the importance of that communication, the importance of that ability to express why the blue button needs to come on Wednesday and why that is in a shared interest of the organization. That's where that's why it's so valuable, and it's why it's so hard.
No, and you're so right. I mean, I used to get, there was a guy that I worked with, a hockey player as well. And he used to always say, you like route one, which is to smash the ball through everyone. And I had to learn over time to sort of slip one right, slip one left, the short ball, just to change it up. And I hope that I've improved on that. Not being so harshly direct, but direct with a good intention.
And it always was for me. But I think equally, when it's not there, you miss it, right? So as a manager, as a leader, I've known there was something someone's not saying. There's something here that somebody isn't saying, and I can't tease it out of them. And it's like you think to yourself, God, I need a Ryan. I need someone who's just going to go, the problem is this, and this is what we should be talking about. And it is sometimes you need route one, but you need route one where, like I say, it comes from a place of empathy. It comes from a place where you've got a common goal, and the common goal is not the delivery of the button. It's the higher up. And that's kind of bringing it full circle. That can be the value of OKRs, is it can encourage the conversation to go up in that way. It rarely does, because that's rarely how they're understood. It's just, well, I need a blue button because I need that page, because I need that thing. It's like you're just making another hierarchy. You're not actually aligning people around. And these are the choices we need to make to be successful. And if we take that path, that's the outcome. And if we take that path, that's the outcome. We both benefit from option A, for example.
Well, which is, I mean, it's a diversity thing. You need to have all different types of people in the room. And I always used to sort of have in the back of my mind that sometimes you need to be one person in the room because there's all these other people in the room. And when they're not, and if there's someone else that's like, there's always going to be. I mean, it's use my example. That, if I'm usually the one that's direct and blunt, and there's someone else that's more direct, more blunt, then I don't have to be that guy. So I'll be the other. I'll be someone else. I'll be the collaborative and the nice guy, whatever it is, because there's someone else to do that other role. Because I think you need to have that fluctuation in order to get, a good result.
And that's exactly what we're trying to achieve with our. When we're combining meeting analytics and personality analytics for a manager, is to sort of say, look, this is what the makeup looks like, and these are the people you can go to if you need a route one comment, then this is the person who's going to give it to you, and if you need a bit more of a go away and think about it, then this is the person to ask. And it's not about kind of removing any of the humanity. It's just there's an awful lot that's left unsaid. Or it's said at the water cooler when actually it needed to be said in the meeting for everybody's benefit. It might have been uncomfortable, but it just needed to be said. And so for managers to understand the dynamics of their team and the character of the work that's being done, it allows them to pull the strings in the way that they might need to, where they're giving people the authority to look. I'm asking you for your route one opinion. Right? Say it as you see it, and then let's go from there.
Yeah, and I think there's a cultural thing to that as well. Something I definitely noticed when I moved over to the UK from SA. I find here people are a lot more, I don't know if it gets to the point or direct, or, there was a joke about South Africans talking like they're speaking with a machine gun. Because like, da, 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 da. But I definitely noticed my first couple of years in the UK that I had to learn how to, talk a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, and then down the middle. So it's just it's a cultural thing. I mean, it's the same working with resources in Europe and India and that. You've got to be aware of how they handle conflict and,
Absolutely.
So, and lobbying things, that kind of stuff.
Sorry, I was just going to say on the end of that, that's absolutely true. And cultural dynamics is important. But even within those cultural dynamics, you have different personalities. And again, that's the importance of understanding the character of the work, because if you if you're taking it too high level, or the way to navigate that is to be specific, but within the cultural kind of norms, but be really specific, and then everybody's having the same conversation, and there's not this kind of unspoken bit that is what ultimately trips people up. It's not what's said; it's what's not said that gets us in trouble.
Yeah, and it's funny. I've just finished reading a book now, which I recommend to you, because you recommended the goal to me. Turn the ship around. Which is about leadership with intent, and it's moving away from the sort of leader-follower culture that we've grown up with in business to leader-leader, which is, empowering. So instead of being top-down, it's bottom-up. And there's a couple key concepts in there, things like, taking deliberate actions. And I mean, this is, very, very short summary, but it's written by an ex-captain of a submarine, and how he got handed the submarine with the worst crew, the worst record, etc. And he had 180 days to be ready for deployment, and how he approached it with his team and how they changed things. And he had obviously some conceptual things he wanted to try out, and how some of them worked and some of them didn't work, and all the rest of it. And I'll save that for you to read, because I think it's worth reading and seeing how he puts it all together. But a lot of this and a lot of these problems, and you talked about trust in the agile team, rely on a leader-leader culture, not a leader-follower culture. Because everyone has to buy in, have their say, be willing to trust the other person, etc. So yeah, worth the read.
And that's ultimately the difference between agile and waterfall, where agile will win every time. Is people at the front line have the information first, so they're the people who need to be able to make the choices that need to be made quickly. Now, if there's choices that need to be made slowly and they're bigger, they're more strategic, or that they're then yes, there's still a need for different roles and probably a type of hierarchy, if probably not the traditional hierarchy thinking, but there are different types of choices that need to be made, but the ones that need to be made quickly and the ones that need to be made for the purposes of kind of productivity and efficiency, they need to be made at the front line.
Well, this is what's in the book. So he changes how instead of him being the captain who decides everything and is the bottleneck, in essence, it's the other way around. The crew makes the decisions. They know their areas. They handle the situations, and all he has to do really is confirm what they've said. So they're going to go to periscope depths. He says very well. They're going to blow the ballast tanks. He says very well. Now he makes comments like the times where he's gotten involved to make changes, he's actually made more mistakes, because now he doesn't have the technical knowledge of that vessel, whereas he did the previous vessel, because he was a different role. And that's sort of, I think, the nice medium is that you trust your team to make the decisions, as long as you give them the guidelines or the guidance and the what's the word? Not the parachute, the net, that if they make a mistake, it's not a big deal. You can recover from it, just learn from it.
So I agree with you, and I agree with that take on the book. I feel like I've read a similar book, or it might have been sort of the Stanley McChrystal book, which is a similar sort of message. And I think that type of dynamic between the workforce and the leadership, what's happening there is very much about that character of the work, right? So the frontline people are bringing their choice. This is the choice I've made. And then it's the leader's responsibility to know, well, have we got a decent enough process to make that choice? Have you got the situational experience and expertise to be doing it? Have you got the data you need to be doing it? Are we making it for the right reasons? And are we sort of motivated in the right direction? It's almost a sense check of, is the character of the work, is the character of the decision appropriate for that person to be making it? If it is, fine, let them make it. And it's more about then spotting when a choice is being made where the character of the work is ugly, or the person making that choice is the wrong person, not because there's anything wrong with them, but just because there's not a match between that person's expertise and experience and the character of that particular work. So that's why we're fascinated with personality, but not just the personality of the work, not just the personality of the worker, but the character of the work as well. That makes that possible.
Yeah, I must definitely put you in contact with Diane. she's got a thing called, what's it called, RAW, WARAW, workplace resilience something. I'll have to get the acronym, but they are doing assessments of people and their stress and their energy and all that stuff, to help them cope. I mean, obviously through the pandemic and that as well, but it's almost that it's aligned to what you're doing. But I don't think they have a tool or technology that lines up with that, if that makes any sense. So I'll after this, I'll put you in contact.
Right.
So I think it'd be nice, complimentary.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And they're probably already, on one level, it's intuitive and it's kind of obvious that these things are multifactorial, and it's a system that creates that frustration and that stress. The stress manifests because of problems elsewhere, and those problems could be a lack of information that they're dependent on. It could be a lack of confidence and experience. It can be all sorts of things. It can be, like I say, hundreds of different reasons that people find themselves under pressure and then behaving because of their personality dynamics, behaving in ways that are less desirable for them and for the organisation. So, yeah, no, it'd be fascinating to have a conversation for sure.
Yeah, good. We've gone fairly long now. Do you have anything else, or do you want to end it there?
I think we've covered most of the things that I think I was just, as far as kind of future of the work, that was the only area that I thought we'd maybe touch on. What does the future of digital workspace look like? Because I think that's I think the future of digital workspace is an interesting topic for a number of different reasons. And I think there's a lot of predictions being made at the moment on flawed data. But yeah, other than that, no, I think we've covered most things.
So what do you think then? What do you think is the future?
I think it's impossible to predict the future because I think the data that we have at the moment is flawed data. All right, this is not a usual situation, and to make any predictions about the future of work based on a pandemic, I think a bit silly. But what I would say is, a lot of the problems that exist now and that people are concerned about now and have come to the forefront already existed, and they exist even when people are in an office. And those things are, lack of efficiency, lack of alignment, and people feeling isolated, people not feeling like they've got autonomy. I feel like those are problems that we had before the pandemic, and they're problems that we'll still have after the pandemic, whether or not people go back to the office or stay remote. Now, remote might dial up the pressure at certain times or magnify some of those issues, but I don't think those things necessarily are going to change. What I do think will change is, and I think is something that sort of as a generation, you and I will have started at one end of this trend and see out the other end, is the technical competence of people who are in non-technical roles and the types of roles that are required of software. So I think the kind of the no code and low code apps that are being invested in now will be really influential. We've seen a massive explosion in robotic process automation and that industry. But equally, just putting tools in people's hands, Airtable, for example, allowing people to create their own apps and their own data-driven apps. That I think will have a massive influence, but it obviously brings with it its own kind of challenges around security and that type of stuff. And I think there's some interesting stuff that will happen, but I think the ability to create automation, to automate processes and create technical solutions within departments without having to go to technical teams, I think that's something that we'll see growing. And I think also, if you look at kind of where investment is going, there is this, like Slack are kind of the classic example of creating products in ways that mean they can be adopted at the front line and then filter their way back. Now, you can discuss the success of that or otherwise with Slack, right? So it's a fairly ubiquitous tool, but obviously had challenges in terms of enterprise revenue and problems that Salesforce will now solve for them. But that methodology of building an app that can be adopted almost like a consumer app at the front line and then sold into the enterprise sort of in reverse to what used to happen, I think that's a massive trend. So those two things, I think, will dramatically influence the way people set up their digital workspaces and how they go about doing their jobs.
Well, that's how Zoom's grown as well. I mean, it's the things you can install without having to ask IT to install it.
Yeah.
So I mean, the amount of tools that have spun up, Whimsical's one, Miro's another, tools you would probably not. Yeah, tools you probably would never have used because it was really, I mean, barring yourself or me. I mean, yeah, you introduced me to Miro before. It was called Miro. I think it was called Real-Time Board or something.
That's right. It was. Yeah.
But you know, it was very much a pocket thing. You know, you would use it, that I would use it, but no one else would really use it because there was no need. Now that you're sitting at home, I mean, I'm in a different country to everyone else. You need a way to connect real time and collaborate and you know, people are buying into it because the tools are actually really good. I mean, for the most part, you know, they all work. And in fact, it's got to a point now where if they go down, we had a problem with Figma the other day. That's what our designs are, and that wasn't working for a day, and that actually created panic because we didn't have a backup. You know, now we have a backup every day, but you know, we're so reliant on these services and become reliant on them because of our distributed working.
Yeah, and I think that's only going to increase, isn't it? You know, but I do feel that somewhere along the way, security and the ability to adopt some of those tools in a way that's compliant and secure will be really, really important. You know, for example, if I could use Zapier and Airtable and some of these tools that I use for building automations myself, if I could use them with a client and know that I was doing that in a compliant way because there's customer data going through them and all that sort of stuff, that would be game changing.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Let's tie up there. Where can people get hold of you?
They can get me at Stephen with a PH, like step hen, Stephen.russell@shumi.io, or via the Shumi website as well, which is just shumi.io, shumi.io.
Why did you pick Shumi as a name?
So Shumi is a Japanese word. It actually all comes back to kind of that obsession with the goal and with lean and understanding continuous process optimization and all that sort of stuff. Shumi is actually a Japanese word that means hobby. Now it resonated with me on a number of levels. So one is, you know, just a fascination and an interest in this topic as you would have in I don't know, photography or flower arranging, but also, you know, as I understood it and where the word was introduced to me, it's Shumi in Japanese. We say hobby, and it's sort of the thing you do for leisure. But in Japanese, and I don't speak Japanese, so I'm told this. It has more of a connotation with the thing that you devote attention to and devote you try to attain mastery in. So it's all about the attainment of mastery, but doing that in a way that you enjoy and that doesn't feel painful. That's ultimately kind of at the heart of what we're trying to do is give people the opportunity to attain mastery by breaking down their performance at work into areas that they can focus on and improve on incrementally. So just continuously improve, but in a way that isn't top down. It's about them enjoying their work and getting the best from it.
Very interesting. I mean, I never thought it was Japanese. I thought you were a big F1 fan or something.
Oh, really? No, predates that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Great. Well, thanks for being on here, and we'll keep in touch.
Pleasure. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Heather Bicknell is our producer and editor. Thank you, Heather, for your hard work on this episode. Please subscribe to the series and rate us on iTunes or the Google Play Store. Follow us on Twitter @the DWW Podcast. The show notes and transcripts will be available on the website www.digitalworkspace.works. Please also visit our website www.digitalworkspace.works and subscribe to our newsletter. And lastly, if you found this episode useful, please share with your friends or colleagues.